Hi, everybody. I just wanted to record a brief introduction to week 10, the topic of which is abstract expressionism. Abstract expressionism is the first homegrown American art movement we're talking about in the course, and it follows the Surrealist period in Europe and primarily takes root in the U.S. in the years right around World War I and after World War I. The video this week, or rather the video lecture this week, does a really good job talking about some of the conditions in Europe, primarily the war, that sets up some of the mood that influences abstract expressionism, and also discusses the fact that there are artists who come to the United States as refugees or simply as immigrants in the post-war period and become very influential in the art world, both as artists and teachers. Okay, some quick housekeeping. The reading this week is chapter 15 in Gompertz on abstract expressionism. There's also two short readings by art critics. See, the art critics were very influential in establishing the movement of abstract expressionism. And as the lecture this week talks about, there isn't one really signature style of abstract expressionism. There's actually a lot of very different kinds of artistic expressions developed by different artists. However, what unified the artists of this movement were the sort of the principles or the philosophy of the movement. And what's particularly interesting is that Greenberg had one particular way of looking at what abstract expressionist artists were doing, where Harold Rosenberg had another attitude about it. So I hope you'll look at those readings carefully and really think about the fact that they seem to come from two different orientations. Greenberg is perhaps more cerebral, more logical in the way he understands what an artwork is, how an artwork is determined, and how an artwork fits into the logic of art as it has developed over time. And Rosenberg seems to be more interested in a very intuitive idea of what an artwork is, how action is conducted in the process of making art. He's very interested in the very idea of process, maybe even more so than the product. So I want you to look at sort of the difference between perhaps a cooler, more analytical way of looking at art, and on the other hand, a more emotional way of looking at art. There's also a short video of Jackson Pollock painting by Hans Nemuth. It's a really famous short clip of Jackson Pollock's process. Now, a lot of people look at Pollock and they say, well, couldn't anyone do that? All it is splashing paint around. But I do want you to think very seriously that this work is probably more complex than meets the eye. And it's harder to get the colors to connect to each other and to really sort of establish an overall rhythmic composition than perhaps meets the eye. So I hope you will approach Jackson Pollock with an open mind and recognize that his technique was probably a lot harder to achieve than we might think at first glance. There's also a discussion board this week and a quiz, so please look that over. And I just want to say I'm really impressed with both the discussions as well as the journal entries. You've really pushed your thinking each week. Your responses get a little tougher, a little deeper, a little more complex. Please keep pushing that. I expect that you're all in different places as you are. You're only looking at your development against yourself, not against anybody else. It's helpful, though, perhaps, to look at the discussions, read each other's discussion posts, and see who seems to be really nailing the material, who's able to sort of connect art across periods or make really complex relationships between artists and artworks, and see how they compare and contrast. Um, so it's always a good idea to read each other's postings. Keep in mind too that when we do a discussion board, the entire assignment is you posting as well as your responses to two other people. It won't even show up in my grade book just telling me I need to grade your discussion unless you have actually done all three parts, meaning the original post as well as the two discussion posts, the two response posts. So do all three, or I'm not going to even see it, and I can't give you full credit unless you do. So please, please keep in mind that I feel that the majority of the work is really moving absolutely in the right direction. They're getting really much more complex. That is, your responses are getting much more complex. If you're not sure that you feel the same way I do, go back and read some of your earlier work, and I think you'll see a difference. Okay, there is a short quiz, and remember to get the first discussion thread done by Thursday night, and then the two response posts done by Sunday. And if you have any questions, let me know. Now, as for abstract expressionism, I'll just say a few more things about it. Basically, this movement follows surrealism. The art world, the center of the art world, moves from Paris to New York with the end of World War II. Remember, European cities are largely not necessarily in ruin, but many of them had serious damage and are rebuilding. So a lot of the creative energy in Europe moves to the United States. Now, what is abstract expressionism predicated on? There's no doubt it relates very closely to surrealism, but because it plays a lot with the psyche, it's not particularly interested in representational form, realistic objects that we see in the everyday world. It's much more interested in abstraction derived from the imagination. But like surrealism, it is interested in the psyche and the unconscious. But rather than being sort of a Freudian idea of the unconscious, it takes an approach closer to the psychologist Carl Jung, who was interested in the idea that there are collective images that we share across individuals, across societies, and across cultures. In other words, that the psyche works in structural ways where humans have similar sort of archetypal ideas in common. This idea would particularly influence an artist like Jackson Pollock. No doubt some artists were, you could say, exercising their devils, processing World War II. There was enormous devastation in World War II. As the slide lecture says, many civilians died. We had the absolute atrocities, the horror of the Holocaust, of dropping the atomic bomb. I mean, how many innocent people died in World War II? And that really changed the way people thought about the role of art. There even some philosophers wrote after World War II that it was perhaps immoral to ever make art again. How could we celebrate humanity with beautiful artistic expressions after what the world experienced in World War II? But as we know, artists did proceed and try to develop new ideas for art. They were very personal and internal. They were, in some hand, beautiful, on another hand, disturbing, as you'll see. They vary tremendously. Each artist develops their own signature style. But I'd love for you to really think about what perhaps makes abstract expressionism American. Why is it perhaps the first American movement that is truly international and truly leads the art world? Think about that while you're looking at the images this week and doing your readings. And most important, I think you have to go into this work with an open mind. You guys did a great job thinking about Dada and Surrealism and trying to understand it. So please, I hope you'll bring that same kind of open-mindedness to abstract expressionism. Sometimes people look at this art and say things like, well, my kid could do that, or this looks like a joke. I think this work is probably a lot more complex than you might think initially. And you tend to appreciate it a lot more when you read more about it, understand the biographies of the artists, a little bit more about their lives and what they were trying to accomplish. So keep that in mind when you look at the work. And when we look at individuals like Lee Krasner or Helen Frankenthaler, some of the women that are discussed, remember how difficult it was for women to break into the art world at this point. These women were probably not recognized to the degree that they should have been. However, they are some of the first significant female artists to emerge in this modern period in the United States. And we'll be hearing more from women as the weeks go on from here. All right, I hope that helps. And as always, don't hesitate if you have any questions. One more little piece of housekeeping that I didn't mention yet was the midterm exam timed out after an hour. However, you can resume it as my email said. I think one person so far has had trouble resuming it. As soon as Blackboard support opens tomorrow morning, Monday, I will find out everything I can about that and help that student get back on track with that. If anyone else is having trouble, please let me know as soon as possible. And have a great week. And I hope you enjoy this week's topic of abstract expressionism.